Hello, and welcome to Decarbonize, the clean energy podcast from Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a Minnesota nonprofit working to speed our state's transition to a clean energy economy. My name is Jo Olson. I do communications here at Fresh Energy, and I'm joined today by a few folks from the team. So, welcome to Michael Noble, Fresh Energy's Executive Director, Justin Fay, Lead Director of Public Affairs, and Anna Johnson, Senior Associate for Public Affairs. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us, Jo.
Yeah, good to see everybody virtually.
Love doing these podcasts, Jo.
Yeah, getting the band back together from a couple months ago with our last session update. We're here today because even though, as of our recording, the Minnesota Legislature is still in the midst of a special session, it has been an incredibly impactful year for energy, which, to use your words, Justin, was, quote, against all odds, especially when you consider our split control legislature, which is the only split control legislature in the country, I'll add. So anyway, I know the three of you are practically jumping out of your chairs, ready to talk about all the really cool things that happened. So let's get going. Just for our listeners, over the next hour, we're going to talk about significant new investments in solar, new policy support for a just and equitable transition to clean energy, and innovative new decarbonization strategies for gas utilities. Ugh, say that 3 times fast. And maybe at the end, if we have some time, we can talk about some federal policy. So let's get started, but I want to start with a round robin. Using one word or maybe a few words, how would each of you describe this session? Michael, should we start with you?
The best it could be.
Diplomatic. All right, that's not my word, but that's what I think your answer was. Justin?
My word is momentum.
All right, and Anna?
I'm going to say chock full. I feel like no moment of hearing or floor session was spared.
Yeah, that sounds right. And I'm going a little off script here, but Anna, you were tracking you kept track of the number of bills that Fresh Energy had our eye on, and it was like over 50, right?
Oh, yeah, no, it was in the hundreds. I don't know what the final count was, but it's I think upwards probably of 500 relevant bills, and I think that's a low estimate. So yes,
all right.
Lots going on.
Well, I think these words really set the tone for our podcast today. The first topic on the agenda is also the first big energy policy accomplishment of the year, which actually happened during the regular session. The ECO Act is a landmark energy policy that modernizes Minnesota's flagship energy efficiency program. It's called the Conservation Improvement Program, also known as CIP, and that program's been around for about 40 years. Now, I know Fresh Energy worked on the ECO Act for at least the last 4 years, and this year we got to celebrate as we watched the bill, which was supported by a really broad coalition that includes Fresh Energy, cross the finish line finally. Michael, could you tell us a little bit about what was included in the ECO Act and why updating CIP, the Conservation Improvement Program, is so huge for Minnesotans and Minnesota's climate goals? And then maybe once you set the stage, Justin can elaborate on some of the nitty-gritty included in ECO.
Well, just start by saying, energy efficiency has been in Fresh Energy's wheelhouse ever since a cabal of folks got together and formed Fresh Energy back in around 1990. We've always focused on and worked on energy conservation, energy efficiency, saving energy, making the economy more efficient, and we've always worked to get the utilities involved in helping to drive it and finance it and make it happen. But one thing that's really fundamentally different is now the focus on net zero, focus on a zero emission economy. You can't save energy to get to zero. You have to get to zero by saving energy and switching away from fossil fuels. So what really fundamentally happened in the ECO Act is we improved the energy saving program, and we started to encourage utilities to switch out customers off of fossil fuels onto clean and renewable electricity. So that's why it was controversial, was the fuel switching aspects. If you're in the business selling oil to heat homes or selling propane to heat water, you do not want the local electric utility to be incentivizing people to put in heat pumps or get off, a fuel oil burner to heat their home. You do not want that. And it turned out to be controversial, but the wonderful story of collaboration is that we had all the utilities, the rural electric cooperatives, their trade association, the municipal utilities, their trade association, the big investor-owned utilities like Xcel and Minnesota Power and Otter Tail, even the big natural gas utilities, CenterPoint, all the clean energy advocates, all the consumer advocates, the environmental groups, a whole cabal of groups cooperating and working together. And yet we were up against big oil and gas who didn't want it done, and we prevailed.
Well, that's a great summary, Michael. And I will just digress for a second here and make the comment that I just had a heat pump installed at my home earlier this spring, and I absolutely love it. And it's for those of you listening who are thinking about maybe it's a technology you want to learn more about. It's money really, really well spent, and your utility is getting a whole new suite of tools to help facilitate you getting to make that transition in your home. So it's a really great step forward, and really excited to be able to work on the policy at the same time that we were, my partner and I were thinking about these changes in our house. But the ECO Act itself was a pretty long technical piece of legislation, so I'm not going to talk about everything that was come close to talking about everything that was included in it. I'm going to note just a few things that were of particular interest for Fresh Energy, and I think maybe for folks listening. The first was an item that we worked really, really hard on basically from the inception of the bill, and that was to increase the amount of money that utilities are required to spend to do energy efficiency improvements, specifically in under-resourced households. So there's a current that's a requirement that currently exists for utilities. It's a very, very limited amount of money, and under the ECO Act, it is more than being doubled. So that it doesn't sound like a lot when you read the bill. It's like something like I forget the exact numbers. It's like going from like 0.4 to 1% or whatever for annual sales or whatever. But that translates to millions of dollars being funneled on an annual basis to support under-resourced and lower-income homes doing energy efficiency projects. The ECO Act lays the groundwork for deeper, more equitable decarbonization in Minnesota to be led by investor-owned utilities and rural electric co-ops. This includes pathways for utilities to get involved in fuel switching, like Michael talked about. That's kind of the big aha of the bill. Switching from gas to electric for water heaters, for clothes dryers, for furnaces. All of those things are currently not allowed to be switched in the SIP program, and will be after the bill becomes fully implemented. And that's a big change, and one that we were really committed to as kind of the centerpiece of the policy and the heart of the bill. And then finally, I would just note there's under the state law, the utilities have to save a certain amount of energy every year. Currently, for investor-owned electric utilities, it's 1.5% of their annual sales, and that's being increased under the bill to 1.75%. And again, this is another one of those areas where it's like 0.25, really, that's all you got? But that's a lot when you look at the scale of particularly our largest utilities in the aggregate. That's millions of dollars in energy cost savings and hundreds of millions of tons of avoided CO2 based on reduced energy use. So it's a really, really great package of accomplishments, and I can't say enough about the coalition that Michael referenced, and also want to recognize Representative Zach Stevenson and Senator Jason Rarick, who were the bill authors, House Democrat and Senate Republican, who worked really well together and navigated some very difficult politics to get us to this point.
All right, well, thank you both. So as I mentioned before, ECO passed in the regular session, but now let's turn to what happened and is happening during the special session. I'm thinking specifically about the 2021 Energy and Commerce Omnibus Bill, which has just passed through both the House and Senate. And I think it was about 144 pages, and I'm sure all three of you read every single line, right? Well,
We did.
Well,
I enjoyed it.
Michael's here, so yes, Michael, I read every word.
Well, fortunately, I'm only going to quiz you on a few of the major highlights. First off, the Natural Gas Innovation Act, or NGIA. Ugh, it's just does not roll off the tongue, but it's important. It passed with bipartisan support. Anna, could you tell us what this means for Minnesota?
Yeah, I can get us started. So as our listeners know, we've made a ton of progress decarbonizing our electricity system, but the story of gas utilities is just a totally different story. And we really need to ensure our fossil gas system decarbonizes at the speed that climate science requires, which is not happening right now. Those discussions are nascent compared to the electricity sector. So, we use fossil fuels for a bunch of different end uses, heating buildings, industrial uses, lots of different things that are an important part of our economy that we must begin investing in alternatives without, to avoid the extreme climate impacts of fossil gas. So the Natural Gas Innovation Act establishes a framework for decarbonizing Minnesota's gas and dual fuel utilities and making new investments in a range of alternatives to fossil gas, including strategic electrification, aggressive energy efficiency, and carbon-free district heating systems, as well as renewable natural gas, also known as RNG.
I think that's exactly right, Anna. And a lot of that transition is going to be set up in a series of plans that utilities are going to file at the Public Utilities Commission. And we don't know exactly when those are going to come, and don't necessarily know everything that's going to be in them. But those are going to be really important opportunities, and certainly things that Fresh Energy will be leading on, participating in actively. Fighting for the best climate outcomes as those, first plans come forward and set the precedent for how the bill is going to be implemented long term. One particularly key component of the NGIA law that I wanted to just mention is a requirement that the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, open what we're calling a future of gas docket. It's sometimes referred to as an exploratory docket into the future of gas utilities, and specifically how gas utilities can ensure Minnesota meets or exceeds our state's existing greenhouse gas reduction goals. And under the law, that docket must open no later than August 1st of this year. And it's modeled on work being done in a handful of other states, including Colorado pretty recently opened one. Minnesota will be the first state in the Midwest to open a docket like this. So it's regionally significant and puts us pretty squarely in the first tier, or the first tranche nationally of groups having this kind of longer term regulatory conversation about, all right, we sort of understand what decarbonization means for an electric utility, but what does it mean if you're a gas utility or a gas utility regulator? That's a really different set of questions, and that we're optimistic that the docket's going to create a venue for energy and climate stakeholders to engage, to be heard, as we dig into decarbonizing these utilities in our broader building sector, which is the fastest growing source of carbon pollution in the state of Minnesota. That was from the Pollution Control Agency biannual report just earlier this year. Pretty sobering numbers, actually. I want to say residential buildings increased somewhere in the range of 30% relative to, I want to say it was a 2005 baseline number. So we often think of like we're not going fast enough on climate. This is an area where we're actually going backwards, and so this is such an important venue and an important opportunity. And overall, the bill is a really, really important first step to bending that curve.
So I'm thrilled about this accomplishment and Anna's leadership and Justin's leadership, but I want to shout out a special Fresh Energy colleague, Margaret Cherney-Hendrick, who heads up our whole energy transition work category. I want to say that, in the beginning, when the natural gas industry came to fresh energy and said, hey, how about renewable natural gas? Wouldn't that be awesome? Our reaction was, maybe not. And over a 2-year period, Margaret led our negotiations with the gas industry, and we conceded that there is some future for some gas type fuel in certain niches in the economy, maybe heavy industry, maybe processing food, maybe making steel or cement, maybe peaker power plants. There's some niche that is very suitable for gas fuel, but it's got to be carbon free. So maybe it's ammonia gas, maybe it's hydrogen gas, maybe it's a biomethane, or what the industry likes to call renewable natural gas, but methane from biology. We conceded those points, that those are important parts of our energy future. But the gas industry conceded that electrify everything we can, electrify everything that might be economic to electrify, is maybe a even bigger lever for getting off fossil gas. And so that's why it was so difficult to negotiate this bill, is we came at it from very, very, very different points of view. Their point of view is, how do we have a future that's decarbonizing? And our point of view is, maybe it's not the same as it is now. Maybe gas fuels that are carbon free are a smaller part of the puzzle. But I want to compliment Centerpoint. They were a good faith negotiator. They're tough negotiators. They're smart. They know their industry. And it was hard to get us to yes, but the two of us went hand in hand, arm in arm together. And without us, this bill would never have passed. And without them, this bill would never have passed. So I really, truly want to compliment Centerpoint. What I still slip into the old language, used to be called Minigasco. Centerpoint, the big gas company, they did a good job on this, and they were a credible environmental partner for us. But other folks were in the hunt for what is the future of gas. The labor industry cares about this. Our friends over at LIUNA, the laborers union, were an important player. Colleagues over at the Center for Energy and Environment had a future gas dialogue that they hosted over the last couple of years. We were a stakeholder at. And the Minnesota Department of Commerce is actively working on, how do you decarbonize buildings? Well, you don't decarbonize buildings by just having them run on fossil gas. You don't decarbonize buildings that way. So we are very, very committed to this whole category of work in an ongoing way, mobilizing diverse coalition partners, especially our equity partners, our justice partners. People are really dependent on fossil gas for keeping their water heated, or cooking their food, or keeping their homes heated. But we'll be going to the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission with a full new program focus priority and a major new hire, which we'll be announcing soon, to lead up Fresh Energy's work on what does it mean to decarbonize the gas industry. And I'm super, super proud of this. I think, I guess the jargon is you can't get anything done in America anymore in a bipartisan way. We got this done in a bipartisan way. This was a big deal. So, everybody's talking about the ECO Act because it had 1,000 mothers and fathers who worked on it. Fresh Energy and Centerpoint were really the blood brothers who stuck to it to get the Natural Gas Innovation Act across the finish line. Again, our chief authors are key. Justin, would you give us a shout out to our two key chief authors on this bill?
I would love to, Michael. Representative Zach Stevenson, whose name has already been mentioned on this podcast, had a really good session, but he was the chief author of this bill as well, along with his Senate counterpart, Senator Bill Weber. So again, a bipartisan bill with a House Democrat and a Senate Republican. Senator Weber is from Laverne, Minnesota, in the southwestern corner of the state, and we had a great experience working with those two to get this done.
Perfect, thank you. And since renewable natural gas got such a shout out in that segment. I want to direct folks who want to learn more about RNG and those really specific uses where it makes sense to visit our website. If you go to fresh-energy.org and just search "What's up with renewable natural gas?" that should be the first article that pops up. And stay tuned to that same website, fresh-energy.org, for more information coming about the Natural Gas Innovation Act in a day or two. I think we'll be putting up a larger statement with a few extra details really, really soon. So if you guys are ready, let's turn to investments in solar. As I mentioned before, the final Energy and Commerce Omnibus included a suite of new investments in Minnesota's growing solar energy sectors. Michael, can you give us a quick history lesson on how this year's package kind of came to be from prior years of work?
Well, people are often shocked to learn that Fresh Energy was around almost 20 years before it seriously worked on solar power policy. And that was because solar power was a cute, expensive, fun little niche that wealthy people maybe put on their house. And there wasn't really a solar energy industry. There was no utility scale solar. There was no commercial rooftop solar. And there was very little residential rooftop solar. But in 2013, Fresh Energy and a solar coalition of advocates and entrepreneurs passed 5 major pieces of solar energy policy in one legislative session. At the time, Speaker of the House, now Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, was chair of the Energy Committee and carried many of the bills and shepherded the rest of them through. And whereas there may have been a total of about 10 or 12 megawatts of solar in Minnesota over the prior 50 years, we've had over 750 megawatts of solar develop in the last few years, and it's getting up to be $1 billion industry, probably is $1 billion industry as of now. So this coalition or this industry, the creation of a new industry creates economics, creates jobs, creates wealth, creates self-interest, creates opportunity, creates politics. There are many solar industry companies that now have a seat at the table, whether they're putting solar energy on rooftops for homeowners, or putting solar energy on commercial businesses, or building community solar gardens, the 1 megawatt solar farms that you can sign up for and subscribe to, or the industrial scale solar farms that may be 50 million or 100 million or 200 million or $500 million that is delivering some of the very cheapest power anywhere in the world. So those solar industries now create a dynamic, and this year's legislative session showed that between Fresh Energy and clean energy advocacy groups and the solar industry itself, that there's a force to be reckoned with at the Capitol.
And to drill down a little bit, I think there were several specific things that were included in the final package that were unique to solar that are worth just mentioning for folks. The first and probably the flagship is more than $16 million for solar on schools, which is a concept that's been around for a couple of years now, and actually received significant funding this year. $16 million is a lot. It'll go a long way, provided it's used well and carefully. And we're really pleased to see that get done. And there was actually a couple additional $1 million for solar panels at state technical and community colleges. So it's actually more than $18 million when you include the higher ed component for solar on schools throughout Minnesota, which is a really great investment. The bill also includes an extension, a 2-year extension for Xcel Energy Solar Rewards program. Solar Rewards is the incentive program that supports homes and small businesses that choose to install solar on their properties. and that had been set to sunset, scheduled to sunset, I believe, at the end of next year. It received an additional 2 years of funding, so that program is now funded, has appropriations in hand through 2024. So that we're optimistic will continue to add some stability and certainty to the industry as we kind of go through the economic machinations of coming out of a pandemic. That'll help support a really important job creating industry across the state. And then finally, there's an innovative, what the solar advocates are calling is a brightfields project. And that's broadly, it's the idea of using solar as an economic redevelopment tool for land that doesn't really have other purposes, or can't be, maybe because of environmental contamination or other issues, can't be used for other purposes. And the specific Brightfield project that was funded in the legislation this year is a closed landfill that's located in Anoka County, and that's, you can't do a whole lot with a closed landfill. It's just a closed landfill, right? But in this particular site in Anoka County is going to have solar installed on it, and it's going to have a second life and a second purpose. And we think that's really great. And there's a model there that can be duplicated and applied in a whole bunch of different ways, not just other landfills, but mining and mining reclamation sites, comparable, multiple use applications of solar on productive ag land, alongside grazing or conservation plantings. It was just an infinite number of ways to use solar and integrate it with both the economy and the landscape. And this is a great innovative way of doing that.
Thank you both. Let's talk about jobs now. So a lot of what we've discussed today includes new programs, from solar to energy efficiency to construction and more, which means a boost in the already growing clean energy jobs sector. Clean energy technologies have just this huge job creation and economic development potential in Minnesota. However, who does and who does not have access to those jobs is not a given. Michael, can you elaborate on the aspects of the bill that boost workforce development?
Sure. This was a project. I definitely want to be clear that Fresh Energy didn't help pass or organize for or write any legislation, but there's a new $2.5 million appropriation for a workforce training center called Northgate in North Minneapolis on Broadway. And this is going to be terrific because, this workforce, in all candor, is, too male and too white, and does not provide under-resourced communities the equitable access to, grow careers or create businesses in this industry. And this training center is really going to take that on and try to reverse that. And one of the most conservative members of the Senate, Senator Chamberlain, I guess, was passionate about wealth creation and business opportunities. And, one of the most liberal members of the House was passionate about, jobs opportunity in North Minneapolis. So this was one of those special magics that come together and create opportunity. And I'm very, very, very happy it happened. And I want to congratulate my dear friend, Jim S. Staples, who had his eye on the ball all these many years.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. We're really excited and happy to see that program and that facility get a major investment. And just want to highlight that Jemez Staples, who is the president and CEO of Renewable Energy Partners, will be joining us on July 15th to discuss the workforce of the future and how Minnesota can ensure broad access to jobs in the clean energy economy, along with a couple other thought leaders. So you can hear from him directly as part of our Lunchtime July webinar series coming up on July 15th to talk more about this project.
Well, and I'll third that. Jemez was working on this for a really long time, and it's very exciting to see him finally get it across the finish line, and couldn't be happier to see that project move forward. I think now might be a good time to talk about another item in the bill that at least I think of as it's not exactly workforce, but it's a jobs policy, and that's something called the Buy Clean, Buy Fair Act. And what's included in the bill is actually study language. What Buy Clean, Buy Fair really is it's a procurement policy for raw materials for public projects. So what that means is, let's say the state of Minnesota is going to invest public dollars replacing a bridge. And that bridge is going to have a certain amount of structural steel and rebar in it and other raw materials. We should actually be looking at the carbon impacts and the emissions impacts of the materials that are selected to build that project. Instead of just automatically going to the lowest bidder, there needs to be a climate screen on things like this. We're talking about often really, really significant quantities of raw materials, and things like cement in particular is notoriously carbon intensive to create. And so having a policy in place that actually puts a climate screen on materials like that is a really important climate policy. The reason it's also a jobs policy is when you stop and think about where does a lot of the carbon impact or differentiation, maybe is a better way of putting it, between, let's call steel projects, products, is transportation. So in effect, this policy will often have the effect of pointing to local sourcing as the best way to reduce the climate impacts of specific projects. And that's great for Minnesota, where we have a vibrant mining industry in the northeastern part of the state. We can actually develop and source our steel locally. And policy like this gives us framework for actually doing that, measuring and quantifying that carbon savings and telling the story of Minnesota steel and how it can be used successfully here in Minnesota. So that's a really exciting policy, and one that we're hoping. So like I said, this year it's study language is what was included, but we think it sets up very nicely a longer term conversation, and this is squarely in the bucket of things that we're going to be talking about again in 2022.
All right, well, thank you. So additionally, much of what we've talked about today focuses on Minnesota transitioning away from fossil fuels, which means that fossil fuel jobs disappear and power plant host communities suffer losses to their local tax base. So what does this bill to help enable a just transition, and for those who will be impacted by the move away from fossil fuels? So first, Anna, I'm wondering if you can give listeners a background on what a just transition is. So can you define that for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So when we talk about a just transition, we're talking both about the jobs that are created and as part of a clean energy economy, as well as the jobs that will need to be transitioned away from as facilities close and demand for things like natural gas and coal decline. So too often throughout history, communities, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, the LGBTQ plus community, and individuals in rural geographies and others, who are part of marginalized identities, have been left behind in times of transformational change. But as the energy sector strives to aggressively decarbonize to mitigate the impacts of climate change, we have an obligation to both acknowledge and learn from past transition when policy choices excluded marginalized communities at best and actively harmed them at worst. So we need to make sure that the jobs that are being created are available to and prioritized for folks who are part of marginalized communities and marginalized identities. And we also need to make sure that the communities and the workers who are impacted by facilities closing are not left out in the cold, they're not left high and dry, but they're sort of, provided the resources and I'm just imagining like a swift guiding, like helping hand as we transition to just a new economy.
And one of the policies that was able to get accomplished this year in the energy omnibus bill at the legislature is something very much like that. New funding for and establishment of a new office at the Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED. That's the state economic development agency here in Minnesota. Called the Host Community Transition Office, and the primary function of it is to, or its initial function of it is to create a host community transition plan for the state of Minnesota, and that's specifically to look at what are all of the challenges and opportunities that are inherent in for facing communities that maybe host an existing power plant, an existing fossil fuel power plant that's going to be closed in the coming years, and that includes, I think folks often think immediately about the workforce, and that is a very complex, that's a very real set of problems, and it's very complex. And the reality is somebody who's trained as a boiler maker or whose trade is laying pipe probably isn't going to immediately flip a switch and start installing solar panels. It's just a different skill set and requires a different type of training. So some folks may make that transition, but it's not. They're not immediately transferable skill sets, and so there is actually really a much more complicated set of questions that need to be answered there. But even beyond workforce issues, in a lot of these smaller communities, particularly in Greater Minnesota, that host a power plant, the power plant's providing 2/3 or 3/4 or more of the local property tax base. It's the largest employer in the town, and it's also the largest property taxpayer in the town, often by far. And so, what does that mean for local government's ability to provide basic services for the local school district, for infrastructure in the community when that tax base goes away or transitions out? How do you do that in ways that are more or less impactful for the community? And then what are the economic redevelopment opportunities that come with all of that? If there's infrastructure that exists to support the power plant, maybe that's a rail line or water infrastructure or some other transportation infrastructure. Are there particular industries or applications for those existing resources that might be unique to those types of communities that can be leveraged as assets? And so having somebody in government whose job it is to work on that is a really innovative breakthrough. I believe this is only a program like this, to my knowledge, only exists in one other place, and that's in Colorado. So we're, I believe, the second state in the entire country to have an office like this. So it's a great piece to have included.
Fantastic. Thank you, Justin. Now, I think we can close out our Minnesota-specific conversation with one final thing. Let's talk about our favorite subject. I see smiles, I see grimaces. Clean Cars Minnesota. Clean car standards, as a reminder for our listeners, are a rather basic and incremental policy change that would update Minnesota's policy to adopt low emission and zero emission vehicle standard. It has turned, you might have heard, into a huge sticking point in the home stretch at the legislature. Michael, do you want to give us a quick update on clean cars? Hopefully our listeners aren't too sick of hearing about it, but I feel like it's important that we start the process of closing the book, even though it's not quite closed.
Well, the important thing to know for starters is the Clean Cars rule was always completely within the authority of the governor to adopt this rule, within the authority of the state's pollution control agency to create a Clean Cars rule. It was never in dispute as to whether a current law allowed the governor and the PCA to do this. But, we spent a lot of time patting folks on the back for bipartisanship, but this is an example where partisan politics reared its head and the Senate Republicans decided it was strategically in their advantage to, beat up the governor, beat up the pollution control agency over the authority that the law clearly stated that they had. And first they argued that maybe they didn't have it or they shouldn't have it, or that they're going to try to repeal their authority. And then they were negotiating, they'd like to delay their authority. And could we delay it for 2 years? Could we delay it for 1 year? when the state law is so crystal clear, the governor has this authority. He was never going to sign a law that said he doesn't have the authority. That isn't going to happen. So the Republicans literally threatened to not pass the Environment Finance Division, the Environment Finance Bill, which was all the projects funded by the Citizen Legislative Commission on Minnesota Resources, the so-called LCCMR. The state agency funding, basically the funding for all the employees of the DNR and the Pollution Control Agency, the Board of Soil and Water, the Minnesota Zoo, and close the state parks for the 4th of July. Well, that wasn't going to happen. That was a bad threat. I can imagine someplace the governor chuckle, make my day. That's not going to happen. So the drama played itself out, and now the last word on it was, we're going to make it an electioneering issue on the next election. The good news is that we had thousands and thousands of Minnesotans who filed comments saying it was a good idea. Subsequently, the Ford Motor Company announced it's going to put enormous resources into making the Ford F-150 pickup truck all electric, America's most popular vehicle. Over 800,000 of these sold. The pickup trucks sold are now going to have the opportunity to run all electric. Minnesotans prevailed. The car companies did not, the car dealers did not, and Minnesota is going to be a clean car state. And what that essentially means is that all the cars that are manufactured with an electric plug will be available for sale in Minnesota because the car companies are going to be meeting their benchmark threshold to sell 5% or then 7% of the cars with an electric plug. And there's no reason for anybody to fret or worry or panic about this. If you don't want an electric car, don't buy one. That's a Governor Walz's slogan. You don't want an electric car, don't buy one. No one's asking anyone to drive a car they don't want to drive. So I'm very proud of this. This was something that Fresh Energy initially spoke to all the candidates running for governor before they got elected. And then as soon as Governor Walz came into office, we brought him this policy, very, very formally, a request for him to take action, and he did. So.
Well, and I just want to, this legislative road was not easy or simple this year, and I want to particularly recognize both the governor's team and the folks at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency who hung in there and fought really hard for this, but also especially want to recognize the conferees on the House side who held the line really, really firm and made the public case for why clean cars was so important and why the legislature should not intervene. And those folks are the House Environment Chair, Rick Hansen, and then three of his fellow colleagues, Amy Wozlowick, Kelly Morrison, and Peter Fisher. They were really, all four of those folks were really great leaders on this, and really, really, Fresh Energy is very grateful to them for hanging in there.
And I want to jump in too and recognize Anjali Baines on staff at Fresh Energy. She has really been, leading a lot of the charge here on clean cars. I think, she started almost 2 years ago at this point, and this has been her big project. So if you've read an interview about clean cars or listened to anything, it's probably Anjali from the Clean Transportation team who's been interviewed and giving people the scoop on what the actual facts are on clean cars. And I think she's going to be on the Electrify This podcast like this week talking about clean car standards in Minnesota. So thank you, Anjali. Pretty cool. I don't think anyone on the call knew that. So breaking news. All right, so we've covered a lot. Is there anything we missed or last Minnesota-specific updates you guys want to add before we move on to federal policy?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in and just kind of highlight a major accomplishment of the session, which is that the House passed a sweeping, large 180-page omnibus bill that came out of Chair Jamie Long's committee that was 180 pages of very good energy policy that we need to move towards the decarbonization that science demands of us. And that passed off the House floor and included every Democrat voting for it. So that was a historic bill. It included 100% clean electricity standard by 2040, which had been updated from the previous biennium. That had been 100% clean electricity by 2050. So it was even better than the bill that passed a couple of years ago. And over on the Senate side, that same 100% standard was offered as an amendment on the floor by Senator Frentz. And that it did not pass, but it only came 3 votes short of passing the Senate. So in that body, every DFL member also voted for it. So, you know, we've just set a high standard for the legislature and for ourselves and for the energy community in terms of what we can get done and what we can almost get done. And so I think that's harkening back to Justin's word of the session. I think there's some momentum going forward that we can be proud of and we can build off of going into next year.
And I appreciate that, and I really hope we do build it on the momentum. As a lobbyist, it's hard for me not to dwell at least a little bit on the things that we wanted to get done but didn't. As proud as I am of the work that we did this year, a couple of things that are worth noting that are important for Fresh Energy moving forward. First is a policy that we worked on the last couple of years dealing with the commercial energy code. And putting the code, using the code as a tool to lead to better buildings for Minnesotans that are more efficient and pollute less. And there was a policy that was included in the package that Anna described that passed the House that would have put Minnesota's commercial energy code on track to produce net zero buildings. All new buildings would be net zero by the year 2036. That's actually really ambitious when you think about what the code is, right? It's the floor. It's the worst building you can build legally. That's what the code is, and that by middle of next decade, no building would be built in Minnesota that had an emissions impact. It was a pretty amazing thing, and we didn't quite get it done this year. We got very, very, very close, but we're really excited about the coalition we have on that policy, and we're going to come back and take another big swing at it in 2022. One other thing I'll just mention on that we actually did get done this year, or made progress on this year, I should say, is probably a better way to put it, is funding for transit. You know, we at Fresh Energy, we've been doing a lot of work on electrifying and cleaning up our various modes of transportation, including and especially cars. But that is not a replacement for investing in the public transportation infrastructure that communities around the state depend on. And the transportation package that got done this year makes what I believe is the largest investment in transit ways in probably close to a decade. Somebody can fact check me on that, but it's in that ballpark. It's $50-60 million in new funding for, I believe it's the E-Line is the next bus rapid transit project that's going to be built out. And that's just really great. And it's important that that kind of investment goes hand in hand with the electrification policy work that we've been leading on at Fresh Energy. So wanted to just put a plug in for those two pieces.
So I want to chime in and remind people at the very beginning of the podcast, when you asked me for a couple, 3 words, I said the best we could do. But the best we could do isn't good enough. The reality is that we didn't leave anything on the table that could be negotiated in a bipartisan legislative arena. But we do not yet have a legislature where a majority of the legislators care to solve the climate crisis, care to do it with equity and prosperity, to address every aspect of our energy profile. You know, the physics of the matter, the plain physics of the world that we actually live in, is that we have to get all the sectors of the economy to zero carbon over the next 20 to 30 years, mid-century. And I would say that this afternoon in Portland, Oregon, where the temperature is breaking a record that was set yesterday, and that broke a record that was set 2 days earlier. I believe yesterday afternoon, the temperature was 111 degrees Fahrenheit. And our children will look back on that, and the record will be broken again and again in the future. We are in a climate crisis. The physics isn't negotiating the way politicians negotiate. We need so much more of our from our legislators, from our legislature, from our governor. We need a response that's appropriate to the climate crisis that we're living through.
Thank you, Michael. That's really, really well put. As we close out, I want to take just 5 minutes, because I know we're running a little longer than normal, to discuss a few federal policies that we're really excited about. And I think this kind of harkens back to what you were just saying, Michael. Big federal moves that can kind of change what decarbonization looks like in our country. So I know, Michael, you've been a big supporter of Senator Tina Smith's Clean Electricity Standard. Do you want to talk about that, or maybe speak a little bit about the infrastructure bill? Again, we'll try to keep this part pretty short, but I know we want to definitely touch on some federal policies.
Well, everyone should keep their eye on Washington, D.C., because the discussion is happening right this minute of what will be in the president's infrastructure bill. They call it the American Jobs Plan. And will it be a bill that's inclusive of the kind of infrastructure that we need to decarbonize our electricity supply, to electrify everything we can, to rewire America to get off fossil fuels? Or will somehow the argument prevail, well, that's not really infrastructure? Well, of course it's infrastructure. When you see, the state of Texas, the entire state come down because it doesn't have a modern electricity grid, you know that electricity is infrastructure. Our own Senator Tina Smith has got the bedrock foundational bill in the entire infrastructure plan, in my judgment, the bill for a national clean energy standard. The president's goal is 100% by 2035, but possible for the reconciliation, a 10-year bill, is to get an 80% by 2030 clean electricity standard nationwide. And everyone should hold up our U.S. Senator Tina Smith for her championship work on that.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, and I just appreciate about the American Jobs Plan that there is a just transition focus, and 40% of funds would be dedicated for under-resourced communities. There'd be investment in public transit and replacing lead pipes for drinking water. And there's really just no shortage of meaningful projects and investments that we could be making in communities across the country. So yes, looking forward to celebrating a win there. Fingers crossed.
Hear, hear. And I would just add to this conversation. I think keep in mind we already have had a pretty significant package pass at the federal level. So we've been talking about the American Jobs Plan. There's also something called the American Rescue Plan, also known as the stimulus bill, that passed very, very early in the the first weeks of the Biden administration. That is now resulting in many, many, many millions of dollars coming to both states and local units of government to support both economic stability as well as just operations and of government and public life. And that includes the opportunity to spend very significant new amounts of money on weatherization and energy efficiency targeted to under-resourced communities. And that's a really great opportunity that we're hoping folks here at the state level in Minnesota work really hard to maximize and leverage to the fullest extent possible.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you all. So the dust is still settling from the 2021 session here in Minnesota, but it's safe to say that energy and climate advocates have a lot to be proud of. That said, there's still so much more that needs to be done. And Fresh Energy is here as your clean energy champion, advocating for change at the speed and scale that the climate crisis demands. So thank you, Michael, Justin, and Anna, for giving our listeners the scoop on this super productive, surprisingly productive, incredibly productive year at the Minnesota Legislature for clean energy. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. I love doing this with you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks to our listeners out there.
God, it's a lot more fun to do these when we get things done, isn't it?
Yes, here. I agree. Well, thanks everyone for listening and for joining us. If you're hungry for more and want to get involved, visit fresh-energy.org. And hey, while you're there, register and join us for some or all of our 4-part July webinar series. It's called The Intersection of Energy and Community. Fresh Energy staff will be joined by thought leaders and change makers from Minnesota and from outside of Minnesota to discuss how to dramatically reduce carbon emissions in a way that improves our communities and benefits everyone. And I want to extend a special thank you to Great River Energy. They're sponsoring 2 of the conversations featuring the workforce of the future and electricity instead of gas. And in case you missed it, we've also just announced the keynote speaker for our 2021 virtual benefit breakfast. We're calling that event Future Focus, the New Climate Economy. It will take place on October 14th, and we are so pleased and excited to welcome award-winning climate tech entrepreneur Donnell Baird, CEO of Brooklyn-based Block Power, which I feel like Block Power is everywhere right now. So if you Google Block Power, I think you'll see a big write-up in the Washington Post, and Donnell will be with us in October. So register and join us then. I'd also like to remind everyone, and I know you know this, but a reminder never hurts. You can support Fresh Energy's work by making a donation today. Visit our website at fresh-energy.org and click Donate in the upper right corner. And that is where you will also find the place to register for the benefit breakfast. Thank you everyone for listening, and until next time, stay tuned for updates on our website.